Well, we're actually pretty close to being on schedule. I want to thank our last panel, Julie and Catherine and James. If everyone could, just an incredible way to end the day. Thank you all. I want to also thank all of you that have been posing questions throughout the day via Twitter. Those of you probably mostly in the back of the room where you're getting service. We're a little behind on time, but what I would like to do is I'll ask each of our three moderators. I had asked them initially to make 3 5-minute summary statements based on the questions we've been parsing out. We're going to cut that to 3 minutes. I'm going to thank everyone in advance right now, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Joeb. Do you want to go first? Thaisa? Here comes Joeb. Okay. I'm going to stay here with Joeb just because we know that he needs someone to keep him at 3 minutes.
Okay. So, as Charles might guess, it's not going to be about time, but I think I'm going to break out of the categorical thinking that defines me in the residential transformation. And I'm going to link it to kind of just really one observation I had, both in relationship to ideas about sight that I had mentioned earlier today, and about vision and perception. And then I'm going to link it to those 4 social programs that I mentioned: the Bauhaus, the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies, and Keppish's Center for Advanced Visual Studies, which I didn't get to go into great detail about. And I'm going to link it back to 2 projects. One, mostly because I work closely with Doug Reed and Gary Hildebrand on a number of projects myself, and I find them so extraordinarily elegant, poised, and profound. But I'm also really interested in dirt. I just like dirt. And I was very interested in the comments that emerged in that discussion, and they're very sympathetic to a number of my own issues in my own practice. So I'm going to start out by noting an image from Keppish that unfortunately I can't put up for you today, but it's an image of New York City taken in 1952 from a series of satellites in outer space. It was 9 cameras that was used to produce this image. And it was ultimately referred to as ultra-modernism because of its kind of topological flattening, which field operations reference today, and this relationship between process and form as being codependent. So what I'd like to note or conclude with today is, again, to note that a site has micro-forces of influence, latent social organizations and activities that shape and determine what we see as site. There are also macro forces of influence, invisible biological and technological networks that equally shape and determine our perception and experience of a site. Seeing is never purely a passive act. Seeing requires interpretation and negation. We cannot see what we do not know, and thus conversely, there is no real action of the mind without the opening of a new horizon. It is these new horizons, these new micro and macro unknown temporal landscapes that this talk today I have tried to outline in those 4 different social programs I mentioned. What I'd like to conclude with is a kind of observation about Herbert Baer's project at the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies. Here we have a kind of recuperation and a kind of stewardship of humanism in general as an ongoing project of the Enlightenment, a search for an elegance of a spatial and temporal harmony, even at moments if it is a discordant harmony. That search for unity between experience and our faith that we can make the world in which we live, make the world in which we live, make the world in which we live feel at home. The Beck Project demonstrates a quiet, simple, poignant connection between 2 distinct cultural landscapes, and in my view, is a demonstration of an elegant and intricate dance consistent with these humanistic values and intentions. Grigori Keppish, on the other hand, and in contrast, at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies 10 years later, turned to, at two extremes. At one extreme, he turned to environmental art as a confrontation, as a provocation, and an exposure of the latent existing social and physical residual architectures. And at the other end of that spectrum, of course, if you don't realize, the birth of MIT Media Lab and computational scripting and design. All of these themes are part of posthumanism and theories about immanence. In fact, Smithson's reflections on the spiral jetty were first published in Arts of the Environment, a book published by, edited by Kepish. The Niagara of entropy and the breakdown of synthesis, the nitty-gritty, the aggravated layers of infrastructure and junk, and the ethics of dust in the work of dirt is what I'm interested in. A search for complexity and intricacy as a fact of life. As for the tension, deal with it. In fact, learn to embrace it. What emerges in this work is an intricate and elegant complexity. Now, what I'd like to suggest is that it's not that it's one approach or another approach. Yep, thanks. It's that you actually have a field of operations available to you in practice and in landscape. And I hope we get to explore those fields further. Thank you. Stop now.
First, actually, I want to thank everyone. I thought this was an incredible range, and thank you to Charles and Jane for putting together such a group. A couple thoughts I had just in listening to everybody and having the privilege of being able to sit back and watch their images. And the first was to watch so many and hear so many people talk about their own influences and their mentors and their heroes, and then to see them have the opportunity to work on the very designs by those very mentors and heroes, and thought what an incredible opportunity that was, and also probably rather intimidating, although no one talked about that part, but to work on your own hero site seems a moment to sit and pause and reflect on. The second piece that I noticed was just how often in the past we've criticized modernism perhaps for its a lack of embracing and engaging issues of time. We often talk about Olmsted and his attempt to create landscapes that would come to fruition really in 50, 75, 100 years. And modernism is often critiqued for having it be at its point, its best point, right after construction. And yet the presentations today really showed how, in fact, that's not true, and many of these landscapes have changed, altered for better and worse. And then we got to see in the last panel really how time itself has begun to be its own layer, and the multiple ways that we can engage with time. History also as an issue of time. And so I found that fascinating and something that would be of interest to continue to explore. And then finally, I thought what was really interesting listening to all of the talks was that we're at a point in our history in the profession, and I so often hear about how we're a young profession, and although less lately, and I'm glad because I don't think that's actually very true. I was recently at a talk on construction management, and they're about 14 years old, so that's young. We actually have over a century and a half behind us now. But we're at a time now where we can modulate between celebrating the modern works that were done between 1928 and 1976, and really see some of the beautiful work and how it's changed in time, and how they've grown and matured. We can also certainly, at a moment when we need very seriously to mourn the losses, not just Kylie's work at Lincoln Center, but so many of the works by Paul Friedberg, Larry Halperin, Rich Haig, and so many others. But we also are at a point, and this is, to me, some of the most exciting work that I saw today, to have the opportunity to revise, refine, and reimagine these places in new ways to make them relevant, yes, yet again, from the Beck House by Johnson to the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial. And that seems an incredibly exciting place to be able to look back and to look forward at the same time. And also then brings up a challenge, which is to position our own work in this longer durée or in the longer legacy? How do we see our work, and how can we describe the work that's happening today that we heard particularly in the last session in this longer history? So I leave you with that to ponder, and again, just thank all of the speakers who were inspiring.
All right, I'd like to thank everybody again for coming and joining us. I have just a few things to say. One is that modernism today is quite messy. It seems less than ever dependent on the maker of the object or the space, and much more on the circumstances than had been the case in the past. There is far more deference to the found. It's almost like the modernism of Kurt Schwitter's rather than the modernism of, the case study folks or something like that. Here you have in this room today, you've had some of the most informed and talented designers in the business, and yet there is not a lot of this sort of fatuousness to erase what they find in front of them. There is a lot of awe that's being channeled into these sites. The awe of discovery and trying to figure out critically the best way to adjudicate the conditions they encounter and yet make something totally new, and places for people, most importantly. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Well, I think we're on schedule. We didn't have any fistfights like we had in Chicago about how to define modernism or what the periods were. But just an observation, the word that I heard much more at this conference than at the last one, and I think we had a much more diverse roster of speakers at this conference, was the idea of layers. Layers in all of its manifestations, playing its role, whatever the systems-based solution was in terms of landscape, transformation, and complexity. It seems to me, Jane, that as we begin to collect the papers for these two conferences, that we really are in search of understanding the layers. I want to thank MoMA again for hosting us today. Thank you all for spending the day with us, and thank you again to all of our speakers. Cheers.